Good morning, boys and girls. It's me, Mrs. Wilder. Today is Monday, May 11th, and it's time for Mrs. Wilder's Morning Book Club. Remember, we are reading Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli, and we are on Chapter 7. Let's get started. When Jeffrey Magee was next spotted, it was at the Little League field in the park. A Little League game had just ended. The Red Sox had won, but the big story was John McNabb, who struck out 16 batters to set a new 2 Mills LL record. McNabb was a giant. He stood 5 feet 8 and was said to weigh over 170 pounds. He had to bring his birth certificate into the league director to prove he was only 12, and still most people didn't believe it. The point is, the rest of the league was no match for McNabb. It wouldn't have been so bad if he'd been a right fielder, but he was a pitcher, and there was only one pitch he ever threw, a fastball. Most of the batters never saw it, they just heard it whizzing past their noses. You could see their knees shaking from the stands. One poor kid stood there long enough to hear strike one go past, then threw up all over home plate. It was still pretty light out because when there are a lot of strikeouts, a game goes fast, and McNabb was still on the mound. He'd made baseball history, and he wanted to stretch it out as long as he could. There were still about 10 players around, Red Soxers and Green Soxers, and McNabb was making them march up to the plate and take their swings. There was no catcher. The ball just zoomed to the backstop. When a kid struck out, he went back to the end of the line. McNabb was loving it. After each whiff, he laughed and bellowed the strikeout total. 26, 27, 28. He was like a shark. He had the bloodlust. The victims were hunched and trembling, walking the gangplank. 34, 35, and then somebody new stepped up to the plate. Just a punky, runty little kid, no Red Sox or Green Sox uniform, kind of scraggly, with a book which he laid down on home plate. He scratched out a footing in the batter's box, cocked the bat on his shoulder, and stared at McNabb. McNabb croaked from the mound. "Get out of there, Runt. This is a Little League record. You ain't in Little League." The kid walked away. Was he chickening out? No. He was lifting a red cap from the next batter in line. He put it on. He was back in the box. McNabb almost fell off the mound. He was laughing so hard. "Okay, Runt. Number 36 coming up." McNabb fired. The kid swung. The batters in line automatically turned their eyes to the backstop where the ball should be, but it wasn't there. It was in the air, riding on a beeline right out to McNabb's head, the same line it came in on, only faster. McNabb froze, then flinched just in time. The ball missed his head, but nipped the bill of his cap and sent it spinning like a flying saucer out to shortstop. The ball landed in the second base dust and rolled all the way to the fence in center field. Dead silence. Nobody moved. McNabb was gaping at the kid, who was still standing there all calm and cool, waiting for the next pitch. Finally, a sort of grin slithered across McNabb's lips. He roared, "Get my hat, get the ball." 10 kids scrambled onto the field, bringing him the hat and ball. McNabb had it figured out now. He was so busy laughing at the Runt, he lobbed him a lollipop, and the Runt got lucky and pulled it. This time, McNabb wasn't laughing. He fingered the ball, tips digging into the red stitching. He wound, he fired, he thought, "Man, that sucker's going so fast, even I can hardly see it." And then he was looking up, turning, following the flight of the ball, which finally came down to earth in deep left center field and bounced onto the fence. Bounced once to the fence, sorry. More silence, except for someone who yelped, "You!" then caught himself. "Ball!" bellowed McNabb. He was handed the ball. He slammed his hat to the ground. His nostrils flared. He was breathing like a pickered bull. He windmilled, reared, lunged, fired. This time the ball cleared the fence on the fly. No more holding back. The other kids cheered. Somebody ran for the ball. They were anxious now for more. 3 more pitches, 3 more home runs. Pandemonium on the sidelines. It was raining red and green hats. McNabb couldn't stand it. The next time he threw, it was right at the kid's head. The kid ducked. McNabb called, "Strike one." Next pitch headed for the kid's belt. The kid bent his stomach around the ball. Strike two. Strike three took dead aim at the kid's knees, and here was the kid swooping back and at the same time swatting at the ball like a golfer teeing off. It was the craziest baseball swing you ever saw, but there was the ball smoking out to center field. "Hold it, Runt," snarled McNabb. "I can't pitch right when I got a whiz." The kids on the sidelines made way as McNabb stomped off the field, past the dugout, and into the woods between the field and the creek. They waited a pretty long time, but they figured, well, McNabb's whiz probably would last longer than a regular kid's, might even make the creek rise. At last, McNabb was back on the mound, fingering the ball in his glove, a demon's gleam in his eye. He wound up, fired, the ball headed for the plate, and what's this? A leg ball. It's got legs, long legs, pinwheeling toward the plate. It wasn't a ball at all. It was a frog. And McNabb was on the mound cackling away, and the kid at the plate was bug-eyed. Nobody'd ever tried to hit a fast frog before. So what did the kid do? He bunted it. He bunted the frog, laid down a perfect bunt in front of the plate, third base side, and he took off for first. He was halfway to second before McNabb jolted himself into action. The kid was trying for an inside-the-park home run bunt, the rarest feat in baseball. Something that had hardly ever been done with a ball and never with a frog. Well, McNabb could already feel his strikeout record fading to a mere grain in the sandlot of history. So he lumbered off the mound after the frog, which was now hopping down the third base line. As a matter of fact, it was so close to the line that McNabb had a brilliant idea. Just hurl the frog across the line and it would be a foul ball, or frog, which is what he tried to do with his foot. But the frog, instead of taking a left turn at the shoe, jumped over it and hopped on toward third base. He was heading for the green fields of left, and the runt kid, sounding like two runners with flap soles slapping the bottoms of his feet, was chucking dust for third. Only one hope now. McNabb had to grab the frog and tag the runner out. But now the frog shot through his legs over the mound, and now toward shortstop, and now toward second. And McNabb was lurching and lunging, throwing his hat at the frog, throwing his glove, and everybody was screaming. And the kid was rounding third and digging for home. And unbefroggable, the ball was heading back home too. The ball, the batter, the pitcher, all racing for home plate, and it was the batter, the new kid out of nowhere, who crossed the plate first, at the same time scooping up his book, twirling his borrowed red cap back to the cheering others, and jogging on past the empty stands and up the hill to the boulevard. McNabb gasping, croaking after him, "Don't stop till you're out of here, Don't stop till you're out of town, Ron. Don't ever let me catch you." And that's how Jeffrey Magee knocked the world's first frog ball for a four-bagger. That was hard to say. Okay, let's go into chapter 8. And how he came to be called Maniac. The town was buzzing, the schools were buzzing, hallways, lunchrooms, streets, playgrounds, West End, East End. Buzzing about the new kid in town, the stranger kid, scraggly, carrying a book, flap-soled sneakers, the kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass to hands down and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself ever threw it, the kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard, the kid who tattooed giant John McNabb's fastball for half a dozen home runs, then circled the sacks on a bunted frog. Nobody knows who said it first, but somebody must have. "Kid's gotta be a maniac." And somebody else must have said, "Yeah, regular maniac," and someone else, "Yeah." And that was it. Nobody, except Amanda Beale, had any other name for him. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about the new kid, that's what they called him, Maniac. The legend had a name, but not an address. At least not an official one with numbers. What he did have was the deer shed at the Elmwood Park Zoo, which is where he slept his first few nights in town. What the deer ate, especially the carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, he ate. He started reading Amanda Beale's book his second day in town and finished it that afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story of the Children's Crusade that he kept it and read it the next day and the next. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering. When most people wander, they walk. Maniac Magee ran around town, around the nearby townships, always carrying the book, keeping it in perfect condition. This is what he was doing when his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn. Let's go on to chapter 9. John McNabb had never in his life met a kid he couldn't strike out, not until the runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. He couldn't stand having this blemish on his record. If you beat a kid up, it's the same as striking him out. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them, at least nobody in the West End. The Cobras had heard that the kid hung around the park and the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon on the tracks by the path that ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He was down by Red Hill and heading away from them, book in hand as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "Must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it," said another, "but I didn't believe it. It wasn't a trick, it was true. The kid was running on the rail." McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones. He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead. Let's get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were almost on him. He wobbled once, leaped from the rail to the ground, and took off. He was at the Oriole Street dead end, but his instinct said no, not the street, too much open space. He stuck with the tracks. Coming into view above him was a house on Raco Hill where he had eaten spaghetti. He could go there to the whistling mother, the other kids, be safe. They wouldn't follow him there, would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirted the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels down the steep bank and into the creek, frogs plopping, no time to look for stepping rocks. Yells behind him now, war whoops, stones pelting the water, stinging his back. The other side. Through the trees and picker bushes, past the armory jeeps, and out to the park boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, row houses, streets, alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces staring, faces, the town whizzing past Maniac, a blur of faces, each face staring from its own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address, someplace to be when there was no other place to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from a window. And then could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed, turned, stopped. They were lined up on the street a block back. They were still yelling and shaking their fists, but they weren't moving off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between the east and west ends, or to put it another way, between the blacks and whites. Not that you never saw a white in the East End or a black in the West End. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults and it was daylight. But nighttime, forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had business on the other side, such as a sports team or school. But don't be just strolling along as if you belonged there, as if you weren't afraid, as if you didn't even notice that you were a different color from everybody around you. The Cobras were laughing because they figured the dumb, scraggly runt would get out of the East End in about as good shape as a bare big toe in a convention of snapping turtles. All right, boys and girls, I hope this saves the YouTube. If not, I'll come back and do it again. Okay, have a good day. I'll see you in Zoom. Bye-bye.